My question is to Johann.
Hi.
Hi. I watched a program on TEDx regarding depression and anxiety that you spoke of, and we've heard a lot of people here having issues. Not only the floods, but inflation, high interest rates, things like that, and the fires. There is no real national standard for depression really to treat it and to control it by the government. And the marginalized part of society gets more impacted than the rest of the society. What can the governments do to alleviate that problem? And are you aware of better systems in the UK or the US?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and this was very important to me because I had a lot of depression in my teenage years and in my 20s. And so I went on this big journey for my book, Lost Connections, to try to understand. I was very conscious when I started working on that book. Every single year that I've been alive, depression and anxiety had increased in Australia, in Britain, and across the Western world. And I wanted to understand, well, why, right? Why is it that with each year that passes, more and more of us are finding it harder to get through the day? And then obviously in the last 2 years, as everyone knows, for obvious reasons, depression and anxiety doubled, right? In Britain, and I'm sure there was a very similar increase here in Australia. So I wanted to understand why. And it's a complicated question. I learned there's actually scientific evidence for 9 causes of depression and anxiety. But I think something that connects a lot of them, not all of them. So everyone here knows you've got natural physical needs, right? You need food, you need water, you need shelter, you need clean air. If I took those things away from you, you'd all be in real trouble real fast. But there's equally strong evidence that all human beings have natural psychological needs. You need to feel you belong. You need to feel your life has meaning and purpose. You need to feel that people see you and value you. You need to feel you've got a future that makes sense. I'm thinking about all of you talking about not knowing if you have a future that makes sense, right? So when we think about depression, we've thought about it in a very narrow way. We've thought about it primarily as a biological malfunction. There are definitely biological contributions. Some people are really helped by chemical antidepressants. Anyone in the audience in that position, carry on taking them. But we've got to understand this in a much deeper way. Depression and anxiety did not double in the last 2 years because all of our brains started to spontaneously malfunction. They doubled because we were cut off from each other. We were financially insecure. We were terribly anxious. In this community, I can't imagine how much it went up. So when you ask what the government's got to do, there's loads of things they've got to do. They've got to understand, first of all, and we've all got to understand, depression is not primarily a malfunction. Depression is a signal. It's telling us something. It's telling us that our deeper needs are not being met. We need to stop insulting that signal and start listening to it.
But Johann, you did point out that the chemical response is also important because you have been criticised by some for saying that you went off medication because you felt as though you were still dealing with depression. But the chemical response is still important.
So to be fair to the people who said that, they admit they haven't read my book. In the book I talk about, that's not what I say.
But that was the criticism.
Yeah, but they haven't read it, and they admitted they hadn't read it, to be totally fair to them. No, I think we need to understand this in a broad, for something as complex as depression, there needs to be a broad menu of options that deal with the underlying causes. Chemical antidepressants, 100% should be one of the things on the menu. They helped me for a while, and then sadly for me, they stopped helping me. But we've got to have a much broader range. Can I give you an example of just one thing? I go through loads in the book, Lost Connections, but I'll give you an example of one. One reason why depression has exploded is because of loneliness, right? We are the loneliest society in human history, even before the lockdowns began.
Even though we're so connected in so many other ways.
Well, we've got this kind of parody of connection through the internet, but that's not what we need. So what happened in Britain is there was a program led by an amazing man I got to know named Dr. Sam Everington, who's a doctor. So he noticed that loads of his patients were depressed and anxious for really understandable reasons, like they were really lonely. So he decided to pioneer a different approach. One day a woman came to see him called Lisa Cunningham, who I got to know later. And he said to her, "Don't worry, I'll carry on giving you these drugs. I'm also going to prescribe something else. I'm going to prescribe for you to come twice a week to the doctor's offices here and meet with a group of other depressed and anxious people. Not to talk about how bad you feel. You can do that if you want to. That's not the point. I want you to find something meaningful you could do together." The first time the group met, Lisa literally vomited with anxiety. It was so overwhelming. But they started talking. They're like, what could they do? These are inner city East London people like me. They didn't know anything about gardening, but there was an area behind the doctor's offices that was just like scrubland. They started to turn it into a garden. They got their fingers in the soil. They started to learn the rhythms of the seasons. The way Lisa put it to me, as the garden began to bloom, we began to bloom. They started to form a tribe. they started to care about each other. If one of them didn't show up, they go solve each other's problems. There was a small study in Norway of a very similar program. This approach is called social prescribing. Found it was more than twice as effective as chemical antidepressants because it was dealing with some of the deep underlying reasons. Now, loneliness is not the only reason. There's a lot of reasons, but we've got to understand these are signals. Don't insult the signal. Listen to the signal. It's telling us something so important.
Neil, thank you for your question. I hope some of that information was useful for you. If this discussion does raise any difficulties for you, of course, the numbers for Lifeline, Beyond Blue and the Kids Helpline, you can see there on your screen as well.